hook modifier, we can parent only specific parts of a mesh. For example, we want to parent this part of the cable to this object and this part of the cable to the tower. What I've done here, I just used two hook modifiers and parented it to the two objects. And now if I play the animation, only this part of the cable is flexible. You can assign the vertices for each hook if you are in edit mode. So for example, for the first modifier I selected these vertices, and for the second modifier I selected these vertices. With a mask modifier, you can mask out only specific parts of an object. For example, we select a cube, we select some vertices, then we go into the object data properties, and under vertex groups we make a new group and assign it. And after that we go into the modifiers, choose a mask modifier, select the vertex group, and now only the vertex group is shown, and you could also invert the selection. A mirror modifier duplicates the object depending on the origin point. So for example, if we select a cube, add a mirror modifier, we can see something because the origin point is exactly in the middle. But if we go into the edit mode, select all with A, and then you can see the object is mirrored. With a Decimate Modifier, you can easily unsubdivide your mesh. For example, here's how the mesh looks before. And now we go out of the edit mode, select the Decimate Modifier, click on unsubdivide, and the higher you set the number for the iterations, the more times it will be unsubdivided. So for example, here we can see it has a face count of 2000, and then we set 2, and now it's only 811, and we apply it, and as you can see, the mesh has less vertices. Here's another example with a simple cube, because I only wanted to show you that the collapse option can sometimes be better. Because the problem is, if we select unsubdivide and set it to 2, for example, it sometimes can cause some weird problems. And here the collapse option works better. For example, we set it to 0.5 and apply it. And yes, the geometry isn't perfect yet, but the object looks fine, and you could decrease the number even more. If you have a bad geometry, you could try a Remesh Modifier. For that, we just select it in the modifiers, and then you can choose between 4 options. I normally use the voxel option. You can try what works best for you. It depends on the object also. And what you have to know here is the more you decrease the voxel size, the more detailed the mesh will be. So in our case, we want to make the number pretty high because it's a very simple mesh and it wouldn't make sense to use too much vertices for that. So for example, we can try how high we can make it. Yes, 0.1 works, and then I set it to apply, and if I go into edit mode, then as you can see, you have less vertices and the geometry is fine. Probably most of you will already know the Subdivision Modifier, but of course it has to be named here. So we just select the object, and choose the subdivision surface. And what a subdivision modifier does is it subdivides the mesh in a way that it smooths out the object and make the corners more round. So for example, if I deactivate it, it's just a normal cube. And if I go into the edit mode, we can see it only has some vertices. So in this case, it rounds off the object very strong. So if we set it to 6, then it's just a sphere. And so what we can do here is we go into the edit mode again and deactivate it. And now if we select our vertices and click on the right mouse button, then we can subdivide it in the edit mode. And the more we will subdivide it in the edit mode, the more vertices it has. And so if we go out of it, the subdivision modifier rounds off only the edges now. A lattice modifier can be very great if you want to deform your complete object. So for that, you first have to add an lattice, then make it bigger. So the most important thing is that the object is inside the lattice, and then select the cube again, Lattice Modifier, and as the object choose the lattice. And now if we go into the edit mode and edit the lattice, it also affects the object inside. So you could put also more objects into the lattice or use much more complex objects, of course. Another way to deform your mesh is with a mesh modifier. With that, you have more control over the deformation of the mesh because you can use a proxy for that. So in our example, we have the monkey, and I made a simple mesh that I use as the proxy. And under the object properties viewport display, I set the display as setting to wire. And now I select the object again. Then I click on mesh deform. And as the object, I choose the proxy. And then you have to say bind. And after that, if we change the geometry of the proxy, it also influences the mesh. With a Boolean modifier, you can easily combine meshes or different parts of a mesh out with the other mesh. So for example, we choose the main object where we have a Boolean modifier applied, and now we click on union and we put this cube into the other cube a bit, select the main cube, and as the object we choose this cube, and then we click on apply, and now the meshes are combined. If you have a plane, you can just make it bigger. So for example, if I type 10, nothing happens. And what we can do here is we just use a Solidify Modifier, and now we can adjust it. With a simple deform modifier, you can easily deform any mesh. So for example, we want to twist it, or bend it, taper it, or stretch it. With a Shrinkwrap modifier, you can easily wrap the mesh around the mesh of the targeted object. So for example, we have a plane and a sphere, and now we select the plane, choose the Shrinkwrap modifier, and as the target we choose the sphere. And now the plane isn't really wrapped around because if we go into the edit mode, we can see the plane isn't subdivided yet. So we subdivide it a bit, 10 times for example, and now it is wrapped around. If you have height maps of landscapes, then you can easily append them on a plane with a Displace Modifier. So for example, we say new, and then we click on show texture, we open it, and here I have some from TrueVFX. I choose the canyons texture and open it. And now we can also control the strength. So for example, we set it to 0.1 or 0.2. And then we say shade smooth, and now it's perfectly fine. But be aware, you have to subdivide your plane enough that it works. An array modifier creates instances of the original object and aligns them into an array. So for example, we have the cube, we choose the array modifier, and now as you can see, we can also set an offset here. Yeah, okay. 2 for example, and then we could crank up the face count. And now you have an array of the same object. With a build modifier, you can make a pretty cool animation how the object builds itself. So for example, we choose the build modifier and I press and play, and now the object builds itself. And you could also check the randomized checkbox, and now you get this cool effect. With a bevel modifier, you can make bevels out of edges very easy. So if we choose it here, then we could play with the amount and the segments.